Yep.
There we are.
Okay. Hey
All
there.
yours, Mayor Carter. Hi, Senator.
How are you?
Thank you so much for joining us, Senator. I will hand it off to your illustrious mayors, Mayor Carter and Mayor Fry. Mayor Carter.
All right. 2 for the price of 1. I've got 2 mayors on there. That's great. All right. Oh, you're muted, Melvin. I know you're never quiet, but you are right now.
I'm never quiet, and I appreciate that. I accept that as a big compliment.
It is.
I know. I appreciate it greatly. Senator, it is great to see you, and we just want to say thank you very much for your leadership for our country. Thank you so much for your leadership along our river. I know Mayor Fry is here with me, and I'm holding Amila, who you know well as well, who's trying to spill stuff, but it's her first birthday, so she gets to do whatever it is that she wants. We're excited to close this piece of our meeting, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. We'll proceed into our conversation. I'm actually going to kick it over to Mayor Fry, but excited to proceed with our conversation with you and to be able to do this. Mayor Fry?
All right. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor Carter. Big happy birthday to Amila on behalf of both myself and Sarah and Frida, one of her very few friends at this early stage. And thank you for Mayor Carter, the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to share Mayor Carter's sentiment and just welcome our very own, our Senate's great leaders and some of the transformative work that's happening at our state. Senator Klobuchar, thank you so much for joining us. In Minnesota, we fondly call Senator Klobuchar the senator from next door. And that's not just the book title. For me, she literally lives just a few blocks away. She's been a wonderful friend and mentor and, of course, neighbor. And the Mississippi River, it runs pretty much right down the center of our neighborhood. It is an important location for our entire city and our state, and we recognize that it's vital activities to the entire country. So I'm just grateful for your leadership and partnership and friendship, Senator, and we can't tell you how much we appreciate it.
Right. Well, thank you. Thanks to both of you. And it's great to see all of you. I've spent the morning on an important hearing with Senator Peters of Michigan and Blunt and Portman about what happened at the Capitol. As a difficult hearing, but we actually got a bunch of new information, and we tried to be as constructive as possible. I say to a Zoom room of mayors who have to be constructive whether they want to or not every single day. And our hope is to make sure this doesn't happen again by figuring out what went wrong and what went right. And not much went right except the end, when we finished our jobs and ended up on that inaugural stage with the spray paint still at the bottom of the columns, but the sky was blue, and I was so proud of what we had done that day, and proud of Joe Biden, as well as all the Republican leaders that were there as well. And it's a new beginning for us to dust off our democracy and get to work, and that includes working with you guys. And so I love this group, and I know your co-chairs as well. Baton Rouge Mayor Sharon Weston Broom, I saw her on there, as well as Bettendorf Mayor Bob Gallagher. Okay, so maybe I spent a little time in Iowa. I don't know why last year and the year before, but I do remember Bettendorf's Crawford Brew Works and spending some time there. So I love the river group. I love the river. As Jacob noted, I live on the river. And of course, for Minneapolis and St. Paul, the river doesn't divide us, it unites us. So whenever I go on a walk, I almost always cross the Mississippi River. And we have a beautiful bridge right there, which an example of government investing in an old bridge that's now become a really a tourist location for so many people in the metropolitan area. During the pandemic, they announced that they were draining the Mississippi in where the lock and dam was, which is a whole nother story, right where I live. And there were literally tens, it felt like something out of the 1950s, but it shows you, one, during the pandemic, people don't have a lot to do that's safe, but two, it also shows you that the rivers are such a magnet. People find them interesting and mysterious and cool. maybe Jacob knows the numbers, but tens of thousands of people came over 4 days just to see what it looked like when the water was drained out of the river. So, okay. And they found all kinds of stuff, on the riverbed. And it just made me think again of the attraction. I'm one of the co-vice chairs, now that sounds like a Washington term, of the Senate Great Lakes Task Force. As we know, the lakes aren't just great, they're superior. But we work on protecting our treasured water resources. And I just see this as a major part of our water infrastructure. And I figure one of the jobs of those of us that work on these issues, Senator Stabenow and Peters, and I'm going to forget people, but Blunt and Portman, who I already mentioned, and many others, that our job is to make sure when these guys start talking about ocean funding and ports, which we love, that we make sure that both for many of us, the Great Lakes, but also the river, and particularly, of course, the Mississippi River doesn't get neglected. As we know, the Mississippi moves billions of dollars worth of goods from steel and lumber to fertilizer and grain, and also has the potential, which it is in many places, to be a great spot for tourism. And I would like to see even more, of course, of riverboats and the like going down that river. We all know that just like everywhere else, the pandemic has affected so many of your towns, and including what goes on at the river, but the river never stopped flowing. And I believe that we are in a really good place right now with the vaccines. We couldn't have better news this week than the announcement that the Biden administration believes that by May, every adult, there'll be a vaccine available to them. And at first, when I saw it on Twitter, I'm like, maybe someone made this up. But that was certainly good news. And I'm sure it's been, and having been actually on 2 calls with Dr. Fauci the last few weeks, I think the numbers are down, but the work you're doing to make sure that we get through these last few months safely by keeping sensible rules in place is going to make a huge difference. So what are we doing right now? We have this relief package that we're going to start voting on this week that came over from the House. And that follows on what we did in December, $8.75 billion in December for vaccine distribution and promotion. The upcoming relief package includes an additional $14 billion for vaccine related, and $1 billion for the CDC to strengthen confidence in the vaccine. And so that's really where we begin, because the only way we're going to recover economically is if we do that. For me, the economic piece of this that's going to be in that package, the help for, I'd mention it, local and state governments is equally important. And as you know, that's in there, which really wasn't in there like it should have been in the last relief package. The other things I wanted to mention is my support for WRDA. I've worked with many of you on that in the past. And our recent passage of the 2020 WRDA bill is going to involve more critical investments in the Great Lakes and the Mississippi. We've had some provisions in there designed to stop the spread of invasive aquatic species, something that we've worked on in Minnesota very hard. In fact, we closed the lock and dam I mentioned. We actually had to close that so that we wouldn't ruin all of our lakes and our fishing beyond the river. So the 2020 law we just passed for WRDA also includes provisions that I push for on harbor maintenance and inland waterways trust funds. As you know, they're still better than I do. There's still more work to be done on modernizing our locks and dams. And since infrastructure and build back better is Joe Biden's really his top policy priority, I will note in my presidential campaign, that was the first thing I led with. And okay, one more thing. And the last thing I'll mention is when I announced on that snowy day where on the Mississippi River, I literally mentioned most of your states as you take the journey through America on the Mississippi. And a lot of the points I made were about infrastructure. And I think one of the things that's hard, as mayors, is you can always have great ribbon cuttings for roads and bridges, but some of these water projects, whether they're sewer and water or whether they're actual water projects due to erosion or due to infrastructure are never as sexy, and yet I think we all know how important they are. Also, I've introduced legislation with Senator Rubio this year that would give state governments the resources to mount effective conservation programs and reduce water pollution locally. It's called the Local Water Protection Act, and it would reauthorize an EPA grant program that provides states and local communities funding to develop and implement programs for managing non-point source water pollution. So keep an eye out on that. Those bipartisan bills seem to do much better than ones that are not. And our legislation would reauthorize $200 million annually for the voluntary grant fund to give you guys greater flexibility to decrease water pollutants. And I think, as we know, in Texas, we continue to have issues with climate change. And as they saw from their massive electric grid failure, their shortage of potable water, millions without heat, under notice to boil tap water before drinking it. We also must look at using more revolving loan funds for those kinds of disasters, and actually pass something back in December on that. Last thing, I guess I led with tourism. I head up the tourism caucus with Senator Blunt, as well as Senator Schatz and Cortez Masto. And I just think the Mississippi River, and I've said this many times as I've tried to talk to cruise ship people, I think it's underutilized in terms of what we could be doing when it comes to tourism. We're helping the tourism industry through this pandemic. That's very key, and including everything from actual tourism bills to the bill that I just did with Senator Cornyn that helps our venues, which are the heart of so many small towns, middle towns, and big towns across America. Last thing I just wanted to end with is the importance of the infrastructure bill as a whole. Maybe we can do that with Q&A, but that's going to be our next thing. And there'll be a lot of things in this bill, including broadband, one of my top priorities. But when we do the infrastructure bill, we've got to make sure that we are taking care of our river cities. And that will be high on my priority list. And I look forward to working with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. That, unsurprisingly, is a long list of things that you are doing to to support our work along the river. It's unsurprising because we've seen you in Minnesota and in Iowa and all across our country being a champion for all of the things that all of our communities need. We just want to thank you for your support of the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund. And joining your Mississippi River Caucus co-chair, Senator Blunt, to introduce the STEP Act for our tourism and outdoor recreation industry rebound from the pandemic. We just really appreciate that.
You guys are just mad that Senator Blunt and I, when we did the inauguration, didn't bring up this, esteemed position we have on the Mississippi River Talking. It would have been good.
Well, it would have been. Well, we still have opportunity. We'll keep it going. So I think we can now move into a brief Q&A. And invite participants to chime in by raising their hand or by using the chat. Mayor Fry, I'll throw it to you across the river for our first question.
Nice throw across the river, Mayor Carter. Thank you so much. So, Senator, we're taking a bit of a poll here of all the members of Congress to join us for this year's Capitol meeting on what the chances are of getting a larger, more comprehensive infrastructure bill coming together. So from your perspective on the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, do you think that package would be possible? Of course, noting that the urgency for this kind of bill, it certainly seems to be increasing, but we need a way to pay for all of these items. And that always, at the end of the day, ends up being the sticking point. So what are your thoughts on that? And what can we do to help you get this very critical bill passed?
I think we are in a good place only because, for one, Joe Biden has been very clear about his priorities, that this is the next big thing he wants to do. And there's two ways we can do it. We can work on a bipartisan basis. As you know, there's always historically been a lot of Republican support for infrastructure. The FAST Act that did bring a lot of money into our states, that was Mitch McConnell and Barbara Boxer. I remember I was the first Democrat after Barbara to sign on to it, but we were able to get a bunch of funding out of that. This is much bigger and bolder what we want to do now. And so my hope in, seeing the positive response we have for like Mayor Buttigieg as the transportation secretary from Republicans, Polly Trottenberg was before us today, his deputy. And there again just seems to be this infrastructure has always brought people together. That being said, it's going to come down to how much of a package. And if it's just way too small to really help and make the dent we need for our, as we've mentioned, rivers, but our airports and rail and our roads and bridges, we can use reconciliation again. And I think that's one of the things that we have talked about with regard to infrastructure, that it would be worth it to do this because our country has been waiting so long for this investment. And also in so many of the areas, the pandemic has really shone a light on what we always knew was a problem, including broadband, whereas many rural areas and small towns just don't have access. And Clyburn and I actually lead that bill. He leads it in the House, I lead it in the Senate to put 100 billion in broadband, and we wouldn't do an infrastructure bill without it, not just because it's a really good policy idea, but because it's Jim Clyburn. So I think we'll be getting that done. So that's why I do think there's a lot of impetus to moving on these things. And as I said, we want to make sure the water infrastructure is strongly included.
Thank you so much, Senator. That makes a whole lot of sense. And even if a major infrastructure bill does not become a reality, we recognize that there are regular order vehicles the mayors have identified as priorities going forward. And we know we can work with your office to move legislation like the highway bill, the national flood insurance reauthorization. There have been so many bills that you've managed to push through, and we can't tell you how much we appreciate it, as well as the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which we also support as well. And so I'll really appreciate it, and I'll kick it back over, throw it back across the river to Mayor Carter.
Okay.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm not the fastest on this. Is there any other Q&A? If there's any questions, folks can raise their hands or ask in the chat.
We do have a comment in the chat that says, thank you for your support of the Mississippi River, Senator. So I think that's something everybody echoes.
Someone who is listening, so that's great.
We all see and recognize and appreciate that leadership.
Okay, you see what's behind me? This is actually, look at that. So that's one of those WPA murals that I have on my wall in here that artists did during the Depression. And it's called The Gathering of the Raspberries. And whenever the Southern senators come in, for those Southern area mayors, they always think it's their area. But in fact, it was a painting for Minnesota. Amusing, it's a inner ring suburb called Hopkins, has the Raspberry Festival, even though they don't grow any raspberries. So they had it in their post office since the Depression. They gave it to one of our art galleries, the Wiseman, and I found it in the basement, and we can legally borrow art in the US Senate. And so that's where it is. And the Smithsonian had, during the downturn back in 2009, they had a whole exhibit of these WPA murals that was really cool. And I noticed Minnesota was way overrepresented, so we must have had a bunch of artists. And the next day I told our staff, I want to talk to the head of the Smithsonian. My mural is bigger than anyone's that was there. And then I decided, I don't need to mention it. They probably want to borrow it, so it's still there.
Well, I appreciate that, appreciate the history lesson, and agree with everything you said, except for the possibility that Minnesota could possibly be overrepresented anywhere.
Yeah, exactly, including with you too. So.
And with you and Mayor Fry on the mic with me, I'm sure we can carry a majority here in that conversation. If there are no further questions, I think we can close this portion of our meeting. And thank you, Senator, for joining us this afternoon.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
We'll now proceed to our